Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Heather from ShareBird, a site where top product marketing leaders share their expertise. We're really excited for today's event. We have a fantastic panel on crafting compelling messaging. I want to share a couple of announcements before the panel. First, we've launched ShareBird Recruiting. We help tech companies hire trajectory-changing product marketing talent. ShareBird is the largest community of product marketers in top companies, and now we're connecting the ones that are passively looking for their next role with top employers. So if you know anyone hiring great product marketers right now, we would love an introduction. And if you're even lightly open to a new role yourself or want to see what's out there, you can share your confidential preferences at the link in the chat, which I'll drop in just a second, and we'll keep you top of mind for the right opportunities. Next, the format for the event. The first half of the event will be questions from the moderator, and the second half will be live questions. There's a Q&A feature on Zoom, so go there to add your questions for the panel and share your questions right away so that others can upvote them. Lastly, our next Q&A panel event is March 19th on mastering product launches. The panel for that event so far are the senior directors of product marketing at Salesforce, Microsoft, and at Superhuman. You can register for that event at the link in the chat, which I'll also drop. And with that said, I'd love to hand it over to Eileen and the panel to introduce themselves and get started.
Thank you so much, Heather. Hi, everyone. I'm Eileen Reyes. I lead marketing for BrightHire, and I'd love to go around the room and do some intros. So let's start with Claire.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Drummond. I run product marketing at Atlassian for our flagship suite of products, which we call the Teamwork Collection, including Jira, Confluence, Trello, and Loom and Rovo. So really excited to be here. Thank you.
Gonna go next, John.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's John Rooney. I'm the VP of Product Marketing at Box. Before Box, I run product marketing in a bunch of places, Splunk, New Relic, Unity, and thanks again to ShareBird for having me on.
Great, thanks. And wrapping it up, Emmy. Nope. Uh-oh, we might have lost her. Let's give her a second to see if she can hop back on. Technical difficulties are always challenging. All right. Give her a sec to come back, and she can introduce herself when she comes back. But I'll jump right in. Lots of great questions from the community. So I'll start with one that is the basis of today's topic, which is crafting compelling messaging. So I'd love to hear from you both about what is your go-to framework for building messaging for products?
John, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I have a pretty structured methodology around messaging development around for teams in product marketing, and I think it's been pretty consistent. A lot of the challenges the teams face often, like, hey, what's the product team building? Why are they building it? What problems are they trying to solve? So my background is, and my whole experience has been in enterprise. Usually more technical products for technical folks, so can often be a little bit hard to get your arms around, let's say, Kubernetes monitoring if you're sort of a generalized marketer. So, I always think of before you write a lick of messaging. Do we want to do intro to Emmy or just keep going? We're going to power through. Emmy?
So sorry, I obviously am having internet issues. Perfect timing for that to happen. But really quickly, I'm Emmy Hoffmeister. I lead product marketing at Zuora, and apologies for jumping in a little late.
No worries. Technical difficulties happen to everybody. John was just answering the first question, which was, what is his go-to framework for building messaging? So he was just taking us through that, and we'll hand it off next.
Yeah, I think that, before you actually start writing any messaging, you have to really understand what you're marketing. And I think before you get into, hey, here's the product team's vision and here's what their what their specs are, or whatever their user stories or peer FAQs, the most important thing to have an understanding is, like, what problems are you solving for which people? Make sure you have as much understanding and empathy of that as possible. Earlier in my career, oftentimes it was hard to even see okay, if your job was a Linux sysadmin and you had to, whatever, troubleshoot problems in your environment, like it was often hard to figure out that stuff. Now it's so much easier. Just go on YouTube. You can see any product in the world demoed ever, and often you can do hands-on trials. So I think the idea of like once you get a sense of, oh, we solve these problems for these people, try to get as educated about that as possible and try to build as much empathy. Then sit down and be like, okay, product team, what are you building? We actually it started the last few places. I think at New Relic, I think we first developed, it was called a PMM intake form. And think of that as a handoff between product management and product marketing, where normally, essentially, we normalize the stuff that may live in Jira tickets, that may live in PRFAQs, that may live in PRDs, but it's just simple like what problems are we solving for which people? How are these how did these people solve these problems today? And that gets into sort of the competitive piece. Um, what are those pain points? How are they measured? Who knows about them? What's different or sort of what would be different about our solution and what's the benefit to the company? And we have all that stuff kind of nailed down before we write any messaging. And then the messaging piece, I think, is always a matter of sort of refinement and feedback, and often very blunt and very direct feedback to get to the right answer. I think the worst experience a PMM can have with messaging is essentially acting as a pass through for product, and kind of putting release notes up there. And so I think just having a bit of an expectation of like, you know what, I'm going to take a bunch of messaging, whether that's to customers in a beta program, take it to sellers, take it to Gartner or IDC or Forrester, and they're going to tear it apart. I think if you go with that mindset ahead of time, and then by the time you boil it down and it ends up in a press release or ends up on a web page or ends up in a pitch deck, it should be pretty well tested. So that's sort of at a very high level. I don't know if that's too much or too little, but
Oh,
figured I'd
that's
kick off.
helpful. Thanks, John. How about Claire? How is your approach different from what John has talked through?
I mean, very similar in the sense that I definitely agree that you need to really understand the customer pain point and the product itself before you can message, because if you don't do that, the risk that you run is just creating something that's really generic. And I think that's one of the questions that we'll get to later. But I think that's probably the biggest pitfall that I see PMMs falling into all the time is creating a message that pretty much anybody could say. Um, Not necessarily because of a lack of understanding, but maybe a lack of that depth of understanding of the true problem that you're trying to solve. And I think from a framework perspective, uh, I have a message house framework template that my teams use, but I will say we're changing the way that we're doing that quite significantly. Anymore, I think the luxury of time to really do deep research is no longer there for us, as we have to move really really quickly, and what that puts on PMMs today versus maybe even a year ago is that you have to understand and become an expert almost overnight, and then you have to do the hard part, which is make that really simple and easy for your customer to understand. So the pivot that we've made on our messaging houses is that I want to see what it will look like in the real world. So when you actually get into the development of the messaging itself, making sure that you're mocking it up on the web page or in the press release or in whatever the thing that is going to get into your customer's hands so that you can see what it's like live. And I think that's a bit of a shift, because it used to be the messaging itself, and then you would interpret it into the creative. But I don't think that we all have time for that sort of iteration anymore. So I would say that's the only thing I would change or add.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Emmy, how about for you? I mean, if there's anything particularly around new products or new segments that you might do a little bit differently when it comes to messaging.
Oh, that's interesting. I think when it comes to new products, I mean, I think it's all of the things that we talked about, right? Like understanding the customer pain is most critical. The way that it manifests in me, in my world, and kind of like the way I think about messaging is really getting to that key insight. And I think that this is more the approach that I take for net new products that we're bringing to market. And the key insight is informed by a couple of key inputs, which is one, of course, the audience. So, what are they thinking? What's happening in their world? What are the pains that they have? What are the goals that they have to meet within their business? But then it's also informed by what's happening in the market, right? So, what are some of the other pressures that are maybe impacting the audience, but more creating a need or an opportunity for this product to be, brought to bear? Like, is there something shifting that is going to make this more resonant, less resonant, and how do we think about that? And then the third input that I use for framing is our own differentiation, and that might be brand differentiation or product differentiation. So why can we uniquely own this space? It's really our right to win. So I bring those three inputs of the audience, the market, and then our unique differentiation together to develop like the key insight that then serves as the anchor that we can use for writing the press release or developing the right value proposition or thinking about how does that come to life really creatively through the campaigns that we're creating.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we have a question that was also on the list of questions we were going to talk about today that I feel like is maybe underpinning some of the speed that you spoke to earlier, Claire. AI. So AI is obviously everywhere. Curious how you're incorporating AI into developing messaging today, in kind of the speed that we have to operate on. Who'd like to start? Maybe let's start with Emmy again, if you don't mind.
So just the question of how are we using AI to move things along more quickly? I think kind of to the tune of what we were talking about earlier, you don't want to use AI to create your messaging because it will be super generic and it won't fit the bill. But I think that where AI has been really impactful for me and my teams are in a couple of levels. One, if we have messaging like that we've created, is just a great testing ground. And I think a lot of people will probably speak to that of, help us pick holes. You can create GPTs that have the identity of your customer, have the identity of your CMO. So start to pick holes in the messaging where we can see other people or personas picking those holes so that we can get to some of those opportunities, problem areas, and improvement areas more quickly. I think the other area where AI just really speeds up the process is with that research component of like help us better understand these different elements of the market or the audience much more quickly, or even take in information like transactions from customer interviews or webinars that you've done with customers where you can start to pull in their language almost automatically to feed into the way that we're talking about our product or we're talking about our value proposition, and doing that all kind of in an instant where we're much further along in the process much more quickly.
Yeah, definitely. All great ideas. Claire, anything you want to add as well to that? How AI is being
Well,
used?
I love the idea of creating a persona, like an internal reviewer persona to review the messaging at me. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that
Yeah.
advice back with me. But I will just double down on the pulling research and customer quotes from all of the various sources that those are captured in your org. We do that in a way that I think has just allowed us to really scale that learning and growing the empathy much faster than those research projects would have taken months before, and now you can do them pretty much instantly. So from that perspective, AI has been a huge game changer. I also, this sounds kind of rudimentary, but as a companion for brainstorming and defeating the blank page, that has been probably the biggest thing, at least for me and my team, is just being able to have a starting place that you can reflect on. I always find it easier to edit than to create from scratch. So that, like basic, but don't forget it because it's really helpful.
Totally. I agree. John, anything you'd like to add around how AI is being incorporated into your workflow around messaging?
Yeah, I think I'll basically echo Emmy and Claire. I use it a ton for research, and I absolutely don't use it for creation. I think that there's a misnomer, and I can tell when people use like like you need to know it, so you need to write it, and you know we can all see it everywhere, and LinkedIn is like is certainly packed with it, but AI writing is AI writing, and there's especially in enterprise, there's already enough sort of kind of slop speak out there that even before AI, everything was sort of, you know, scalable, robust, transformational to, you know, open up insights. And like I used to, when I would have other companies would go to like a big show like a Cisco Live or an AWS reInvent, and I'd had like some new PMM on the team, I'd walk from booth to booth and be like, what is that? Like, look at their slogan. What does that do? What does that company do? What is that? Like everybody's always, you know, opening up insights from data, whatever it is. I'm just like, none, that means nothing. Um, and so yeah, I think the summary tools are great. You know, and even, you know, certainly if you can look across tools, but like if anyone uses Gong, the Gong AI is super great. Anyone who's a Gartner customer, because that's another thing from a research standpoint. When you start doing like persona research, there's a chat bot in Gartner now that'll go through all the research, all of those kind of sources that just cuts weeks, you know, not even like hours and days, like weeks and sometimes even months of that research down to nothing. But then I think you're really like then put the AI down and do the hard work of like write the messaging, because I think that's really where the value is. So yeah, just reiterating what everyone else is saying there. I think that's what we still have to do. That's what makes us specialist PMMs. Otherwise we're just kind of pushing work around, which I think those are the kind of the things that AI is really good at.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Great point. So you talked about, yeah, how there's a lot of sameness in the market, particularly in B2B, with a heavy use of AI in some cases. So tell me a little bit about how you stand out from competition, and especially if you're a new entrant. There's a lot of kind of newer businesses spinning up. Curious how any of you attack that. I don't know who wants to go first on this one. Anybody want to jump in?
I can jump in with just kind of something that's very top of mind right now. I think we're all, to John's point, in a sea of AI messaging that pretty much sounds the same. And it's pretty hard to make a distinction between what company X does versus company Y. And if you have the privilege of living in San Francisco and drive down the 101 and watching all of the the tech billboards fly by, I think you can see it firsthand. Um, so, but at the same time, we you know, all the companies that are playing in this space have to differentiate themselves like that. It's like, you know, live or die kind of moment for that. So I think you go back to the basic principles, which is what is the problem? What is the unique problem that you're solving? And if you don't know the answer to that, it's going to be impossible to create messaging that stands out. And then I think there's another element too, which is how can I say this in a way that really resonates? And that's where some of the really hard work comes in, where you actually have to talk to humans. You can't just talk to AI and actually test that messaging out and use the language of your customers and use the language of what real people are saying out in the world. And that I think is the hardest part is to really find the right words that resonate and feel real. And I think when you get there, you know what it is, but it's going to be really, you know, that's going to take some time. So
Yeah, definitely. John, Emmy, anything you'd like to add to that around standing out?
So, oh, go ahead,
Go
Emmy,
ahead,
please.
John.
No. You please go.
All right. I was gonna say, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that play into it. Like, I really like what Claire is saying on like understanding your messaging and your differentiation and really leaning into that. And that's an absolute must. But like, I don't know, I think there is so much noise out there. Like, if you have the authority and if you have the budget, be bold and be big. I do think that especially if you're bringing a new product to market, I mean, just creating buzz, creating awareness, making sure people know who you are, know what you do. And to that end, I mean, getting really crisp and clear on that yourself, right? Like it might be beneficial to go after a smaller niche of the audience that you ultimately see yourself being a good fit for out of the gates. It might not be the right move for you, but you can get really focused, really specific with who you're trying to reach, the types of companies, and really engaging them in a way that feels much more personalized, authentic, and relevant to the work that they need to do. And with respect to AI, the other opportunity now, and we've talked a little bit about like the risks of generic messaging. If your audience is small enough, or if you're at the right events, you can have really specific messaging, or you can get in front of people with like, understanding who they are, why they would need your product, and just make a name for yourself, as opposed to the opposite, to the competition that is seemingly like that you are cooler, bigger, better, and like understand them more than any of the other players that are out there. And so like how do you craft both the messaging but the go-to-market strategy that supports that?
Yeah, I think I would add, this, I mean, specificity is kind of win. The way to stand out now is just, what do you guys do again? Like just really explain it. Like we're a thing that does this thing, like is now like the best messaging. But again, because of the nature of the companies I've worked in the space I've been in, again, it's often very technical tools for developers and DevOps engineers and Linux sysadmins and data scientists. So the test I always have, and I try to run my tests through, is anyone seen the show Silicon Valley on HBO? And I call it the Guilfoyle or the Dinesh test. So imagine what you're putting on the website, or you're putting this messaging brief. If you had to stand in front of Guilfoyle and explain what that is, what would Guilfoyle say? And if you just and I think that is sort of a bar that is super super important. Now that's not every audience, and if you're doing a lifestyle brand, you can use terms like elevated, but like think of Guilfoyle's face right now and be like, it's an elevated way to get transformational insights from a platform of data surface. Like, cool, awesome. Like you've now I think I think if we can build that, certainly, me and my teams, if we can build that sense and that notion of where that is internally, I think that's how we help. But that's again, specificity is your friend.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
times.
I have one more thing to add just on the competition front. Like, I think that this has always been important, but it's probably never been more important to have customers rallying behind you, right? That like, again, if it's a new product or if it's an existing product, but just like working, hand holding a group of customers that can speak on your behalf, that are telling their friends about, their peers within the industry about what you do and why it matters. And so to stand out from the competition, you want the loudest chorus behind you of people who really support your product.
Totally. Yeah, there's no better voice than your customers for sure. Love that. You were speaking earlier in a few different instances about mistakes, things to watch out for. Some of them that I heard earlier was relying too heavily on AI, maybe leaning too heavily on buzzwords. I really love the Guilfoyle test. That's funny. It's a good one. What are some other kind of big mistakes PMMs make in messaging that you would encourage them to avoid?
I'll start. The same way that every rapper wants to be an NBA player, every PM kind of wants to be a PMM. And my big thing is like, the thing I want from the PMs is I want to know, am I technically accurate? But at the end of the day, like they don't carry the bag. Sales carries the bag, and at the end of the day, customers are the ones dealing with it. So I'm not saying I completely ignore kind of PM input, but I think that especially, and I say that as someone who grew up as a PM and I started as a PM in this industry. But I think that like the idea that like the PM is a mini CEO has kind of led to a lot of stuff. And I'm building this thing and I know how to pitch it. And then I think often if PMM acts as a pass through and all we're doing is copy editing PM's ideas, I've never seen that work well in my career ever once.
Totally. 100% agree. Emmy, do you have something you wanted to add to this as well?
Yeah, I think maybe just the flip side of that is, I think the biggest mistake I have personally made and that I see people making is not working directly with sales. I mean, like, especially in a B2B company where, I've spent most of my career, like getting sales buy-in, support, partnership through messaging development process is absolutely critical, because they can be your first test grounds. They are not afraid to be direct and tell you if what you're doing isn't good. And so just getting them bought in, but like then once they feel like they're championing the messaging, then it's something that we can really roll with. And it's not just, hey, what's the headline on the website, but does the headline on the website match the way that your sales organization is talking to prospects and talking to customers. And I really see PMM as, central to making sure there's a consistent story in the market, and sales is therefore your best friend in getting there.
Totally, 100%. Claire?
I can add a few things. Some mistakes that I think I see happen pretty consistently. One is too many words in the messaging docs, and pretty much in general. If you are writing a dissertation, then you need to go back to the drawing board. Most people have about 1 second to give you to read your messaging. So I think just simplicity is king, and that's really the art, which I think is really fun and exciting, to try and figure out how to say something that's really complicated in a very succinct way that really resonates. So that's one. The other is that I think, just to mirror what Emmy is saying, not talking to customers and not getting feedback on the messaging from those that are going to be receiving it is a mistake I see a lot. And it can be simple. It doesn't have to be this like big, huge, parade. But if you're messaging to developers, you better go talk to some developers and make sure that what you're saying makes sense. The other, I think, is spending too much time thinking about the messaging as an input to creative, and not enough time thinking about the creative itself and like how it actually comes into the world, which is something I was kind of touching on earlier. But I feel like we spend a lot of time on thinking about it, and not a lot of time on like actually getting it out into the world and testing to see how it actually resonates. So those would be my kind of top three.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It has to translate to the end artifacts at the end of the day. So we talked a lot about working with sales, working with product. How do you build that alignment and that buy-in on messaging across these different stakeholders? And more importantly, how do you get that alignment without slowing down the process? We're operating really quickly. Claire, maybe you can start on this one.
Let's see. Getting alignment is a tough challenge. So I think this one puts me on the spot a little bit. So I think it depends on what the outcome is of the alignment. Like, are you trying to get everybody bought in on the messaging itself so that you can move faster, or are you actually trying to co-write it? And I think that's another pitfall that I see a lot, is people getting into a room and co-writing it. So as a PMM, you are charged with being the expert here. Like, you should be the expert. You should be the voice of the customer and the product and how it comes together, and in some ways the brand as well. And so you need to be, you can't fake it. Like, you really actually have to do the work to become the expert in the room. So if you get into a situation where you're co-writing, then I think that you've already kind of lost the battle. So I think it depends. Like I said, like, I think it depends on what you mean by alignment. Like, if you're trying to get approval, then come with the receipts, like come with the knowledge that you bring to the table as a PMM to help dissect it and interpret why every word matters and what punch every single word packs.
Nice, thanks. Emmy, anything you'd like to add to this one?
Yes. I like that a lot. I mean, I think there's a couple ways that I've driven alignment, or like, just gonna get people excited about the messaging. One, just going back to working with sales, like some of the best, this is probably more in terms of like sales collateral or sales decks, but it's also very much related to how do we position this product. Some of the best like positioning and messaging has come directly from the sales team. So identify the killer reps that are just crushing it. What are the stories that they're telling? How are they, what's the angle that they're taking? And you make them the hero. And so you scale the success that you see from some of the best, the best storytellers and the best reps inside your company. And the best storytellers do not have to sit within product marketing. I see our job as much about identifying the best stories and scaling those as actually creating them. And ultimately, it's kind of a give and a take. But I think that creates a lot of alignment because there's authority to want, a story or a positioning that a great rep has already, put in front of others. So that's one way, is like actually just take the work of others and scale it and make them the hero. I think the other way to drive alignment, when you have a lot of conviction of the messaging, but maybe you don't have that validation from the sales team yet, is to bring the data, right? Like, hey, we talked to 10 customers, this is what they loved. Or, hey, we did a survey, and what we heard over and over again from, X number of people that fit this ICP is that, this is the thing that they care about most, or this is how they're measured within their role. And so if you can bring the data, I think it creates a lot more credibility and a lot more alignment around the messaging that you're recommending.
Yep, definitely. That makes sense. John, anything you'd like to add? And then we'll switch to the live questions after this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, building on what Emmy mentioned, so I actually have in our kind of standard messaging briefs a section at the bottom, like here's what sales reps we spoke to and here's what direct feedback they had. Because I think that's the most credible thing. The flip side of it is like, I kind of don't really care what the PMs think. I do care a lot what sales and SEs and the people that are customer facing think. And I care a lot what, Gartner thinks. And I've 100% repositioned companies or products before launches based on feedback from early beta customers and quite frankly Gartner analysts and the like. So I think that's showing kind of the how you got there part of it, showing your work a little bit is important. I think the other thing too is everybody thinks they're a stakeholder, and that's the other thing is at PMM. I think that's part of like the hard intangible part of our job. It's one of the miracles of life that everybody is magically born a great marketer and great messenger. So if you ask everybody, I've never heard anyone be like, yeah, I don't really know, I'm not good at messaging, but you seem really good at that. I love that to happen in my career. But if you ask anybody, they will answer. So you just have to be really careful about like who are the people that really matter and what about this level of messaging. And I've 100% sat with CEOs, doing it in my current role around like doing wordsmiths for the most important thing, but I do that in very small rooms. What you don't want to do is end up in a room where 25 people think that they have a big say, when at the end of the day, most organizations it's two or three. And so your job, especially as you get more seniors at PMM, is like understanding who those folks are, building credibility in those relationships so you can move stuff through. What you don't want to do is say, yeah, I got sign off from a person whose sign off doesn't really matter. And you've just kind of burned a bunch of cycles and made it look like you don't really know where the wind blows.
Yeah, totally. Makes a lot of sense. Going to the questions from the group here. One question around testing. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Can you share some specific ways that PMMs can test copy or messaging before going all out in market? Love to hear some things that you've done there. Who wants to go first on this?
I can jump in. We use Winter a lot. If anybody else does, I find that to be a nice way to test both like a narrative and also like live copy. And it's a good way to bring that data that John and Emmy are talking about when you come into a room, like having that as a background. But we also tap into our community a lot. You'd be surprised how many people will raise their hand to work with you as a marketer on things that they're passionate about. So and obviously depending on the product, because maybe not every enterprise product has a community that's really willing to work with you, but I think it's pretty surprising if you just ask. So we do a lot of testing live with our community members.
And for those who might not know Winter, can you give a quick, like, what do they do?
It's a message testing platform. I feel like I'm not prepared to market for Winter
No
right
worries.
now, but
I was just
it's
sure
Winter with a Y.
if some context might be helpful. No worries.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to add to this one? I can also just jump to the next. Another interesting question is, what is your process to become an expert on a new product quickly to support that effective messaging? Any things that have worked for you or your team members?
Yeah, use the product, use competing products, try to like do the work, the jobs to be done of the person that this product is for. and start with users rather than the buyers, often, especially in enterprise. Like if it hits the CIO or the CISO budget, if it's hitting the CISO budget and you're building a security tool, the CISO is never going to use that tool. But somebody, a SOC analyst, is going to use that tool. Figure out what that SOC analyst's job is. Again, it's much easier now than it was earlier in my career when it was harder to get your hands on bits, and it was, often there were legal issues with getting, setting up labs. I mean, there used to be like competitive labs where you'd put like, on premises installations, but basically everybody in the world has some sort of free trial or self-service demo or some sort of product-led growth, something. Like I think that's one where like you just disappear into the woodshed and do the things. And if there are, go to G2, figure out whatever category it is, and try five tools in that space, in the space that you're trying to get into, and like trying, again, this is the kind of thing you can get from hopefully the PM, like what's the job to be done or two jobs to be done, and try to do the same thing in all those five tools. I think otherwise it's like, sometimes you see in a movie an actor speaking another language phonetically, but they don't really know what they're saying. I think that's the problem, and it's often a problem when you have very technical products or technical tools. And I think I saw the question in the Q&A. It's like, particularly for dev audiences, you have to do it. And I've marketed dev tools for a good part of my career. I'm a terrible developer. I have no knack for it and skill for it, but I've done Hello World and I've done like the basic 101 in a million frameworks and languages, and there's no shortcut to that in my experience.
Totally. Anything else, Emmy, Claire, you'd like to add to this one?
I love that. I mean, I think that but again, like maybe the flip side is like, okay, you got to really understand the product, but then you have to understand the way that customers are talking about it or what they're looking for. And I think if you're trying to get up to speed fast, like that's where Gong AI or like a tool like that becomes really helpful of, okay, what are some specific things like that I want to understand in terms of what the customer is asking about the product? How do they, what are the use cases that they're really solving for? A lot of that should be answered by what John was just walking through, but I think that you can hear it or start to grok it directly within the customer's voice by either just going through a bunch of sales calls or by using Gong to help identify like the points in the sales call that are most relevant to understanding what is the product, why does it matter.
Right. Another popular upvoted question here is around, if a product is being released, it's more about is at parity with competition. It's not necessarily bigger, better. What recommendations do you have on focusing that messaging to be compelling and in that challenging dynamic?
That's when I would go back specifically to being hyper clear about what the thing does. Because often, and that's often like the kind of Swiss Army knife platform play, where like, the nail file in the Swiss Army knife isn't the best nail file in the world, but like if you need a nail file, it's probably good. And you now can say Swiss Army knife now has nail file to file your nails. Like I think that's fine. Like you're not beating the top of the end nail file, but I think that's the approach. That again, often that's, and I see it and I've been part of it, and it's this confounding thing where you go through all this effort and you've kind of reconstrued your messaging to the point where like, what does this thing do again? And particularly if, you're getting at parity into a space or a capability or a product that is a very well-known product. You don't have to explain, you don't have to explain what a CRM is. You don't want to, you don't want to dress it up so much so that you've obscured the fact that like, oh, this is now a CRM. Cool. Like I think in that case, and I've certainly been a part of a lot of platform products that became platforms, and then part of that is, you become more Swiss Army knife and you start making acquisitions and bolting stuff on. At the end of the day, like your thing isn't as good as the best in breed thing, but the value of it is it's part of, your tool consolidation. Like it's just easier. It's all in one place. And I think in that way, be really specific of like, our product now does this, this, and this. I don't think you have to put a whole lot of mustard on it.
I mean, Claire, anything you'd want to add to this?
Yeah, I would just like plus 1,000 what John said. The specificity is also very authentic, and it shows that you understand what you're saying or what you're selling and what the product actually does. And it also comes from, like, if you can be that specific, it means that you have pretty decent empathy for the problems that it's solving. So in a case where it can't be super flashy, boring is actually okay as long as it's specific. But yeah, everything John said definitely resonates.
I'd also add something that was mentioned earlier that I don't want to skip over is the customers that you already do have. They're a marketing lever that can really drive that differentiation, especially if they have a pretty prominent voice or brand themselves, and something that you want to also consider. Something else, another question that's come up, in companies that are in their early stages where it might be difficult, sales teams might not be ready to partner or give access to the customers, there might not be a ton of data. Curious how you would think about tackling this when some of the data might be limited.
I can start. I don't have like a definitive answer to this, but I think it's I think then you just have to do the legwork, right? Like unfortunately, it's like, it's great when you have a lot of data because it does create those shortcuts. So what I was saying about like leaning into Gong or going ahead and maybe looking at win-loss data, and that's going to give you a clue of like what you can do to improve your messaging or improve how you're going to market. If you don't have that, then you kind of need to do the legwork. You need to do the winter testing that Claire was talking about. You need to do, you need to get out there and talk to customers. If sales is blocking you from talking to customers, there are other ways you can find it, but you should also, work with your leadership in your company, because as a product marketer, you absolutely need access and ability to engage with your customers. So that might be, it might be legwork internally to build the alliances or escalate accordingly to make sure that you're getting in front of the people that are going to inform the outcome of your work.
Yeah, I think you can work around it for a little bit. Certainly, one hack, and I actually think this is really important. And I'm surprised everyone doesn't do this, but we talked earlier, Eileen, you talked about how important customer stories are and customer validation. Again, no one's gonna believe you as much as they're gonna believe a customer, especially a competitor or peer in their space. I think PMM should be the primary source of conducting all customer interviews and putting together all customer stories, whether that's kind of video or a blog post. I know it feels weird, and often you have teams that are sort of separated. I've actually had customer marketing sit within PMM, actually the way it works at Box right now, and I think there's a difference between the relationship management, the coordination, the approvals, and then like who's sitting down to be able to do those interviews. I actually stole that from the CMO who hired me at Splunk forever ago. That's what all the PMMs did. The PMMs actually we had these these sales conferences that were all over the world, and in each market we'd have 2 or 3 customers to come up and do a short presentation. The PMMs would do the interviews and then build the slides for those customers, and you'd have so many at bats that like you know you'd hear that from a pattern recognition and in talking to so many customers, and it wasn't sales giving them like it was helpful for sales. I mean, this thing, sales wasn't doing you a favor. In a way, you were doing sales a favor, but in doing sales that favor by putting their customer on stage at the sales event, and when you do enough of those, you now build a certain credibility, and also you start to build acumen around what that stuff is. So you're not making up your messaging, you're not tracking down your messaging. There are other things I mentioned like G2, trust radius. You can kind of look around to sort of see what other people are saying about your product. But if it's a startup and it's brand new and like you may not have that body of work, just say like, hey, yeah, we need a customer speaker for a thing. I'm happy to do all the prep with them. I think that is, if you think of it like extra work, I would just challenge you to completely flip your mindset. To me, that's just serving it up on a platter. And then the last hack I try to bring up all the time is get your hands on RFPs. If you work at a company where there are RFPs that come in, it's magic because basically customers tell you exactly what they need in the language that they use when you get RFPs. You may say like it's sitting in sales ops or the sales engineering team somewhere. Get a hold of them, read 10 of them, you'll learn a ton.
Awesome, good advice. Many of you or all of you are at large companies that have multiple products. So I'd love to hear how you see PMM's role in crafting that product messaging that sits across multiple products and multiple PMM teams. Tell me a little bit about how you approach that scenario. Who wants to go first? I don't like cold calling, so I like volunteers. Fair.
Yeah, I can. This is a good question. And I think it's definitely a challenge. So I can use, you know, right now I manage a collection of 4 different products that all have very distinct messages and value props, but the collection itself is brings it all together and has kind of like an Uber value prop. So it's from a PMM's perspective, it's an interesting challenge because how deep do you go on each one of those areas and the capabilities and the features for each of those products and then how do you kind of summarize it to the Uber message? I think the in those scenarios the user and the buyer are different than would be like in a platform level than they would be for like an individual product. And I think just identifying that change helps a ton to figure out what exactly you're messaging to. And you have to be much more specific to in the messaging that you create. And there's probably different variations of it depending on who you're talking to, because if you're no longer selling to like an end user and you're now selling to the CIO, there's a huge difference between how your messaging will resonate with those different audiences. So I guess just to summarize, like you almost have to create more of a matrix in your messaging based off of the different types of customers that you're talking to as it gets more complicated.
Yeah, adding to the matrix, and the analogy I always like to use is the Russian doll. So the outermost Russian doll should be
Yeah.
your corporate narrative, and it all kind of it's a little tops down, I think, which feels like may be uncomfortable for folks. It's also going to bump up against kind of the PM relationships because they all think of their little thing. The old joke is if you have a single product company, how do you turn it into a 10 product company? Is just hire 10 product managers and they'll turn 10 features into 10 products. Um, and so I think you have to think of it tops down. Like here's the company level message all up. And then if you have areas of the business, here's what we do for security, here's what we do for marketing, whatever it is, that family of products. And it goes all the way down where you'll get to feature level, which there are people that are going to care about whatever feeds and speeds at the feature level. But I think it has to kind of logically flow through. And I think often what happens and it happens at all sorts of companies. And the larger the company and more divided they are by business groups or whatever it is, you often end up with a portfolio that's a bag of doorknobs. And then there's a whole, usually a turnover. And that's when usually bring in a new leader of PMM to like do more of that portfolio view. So if you always think of it sort of tops down and, where does this detail fit into the larger story? I think that's a much better guideline than you have a bunch of pieces and you have to create a larger story out of it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think maybe that just from a philosophical level, like I think my approach has also been, um, so everything you guys just said is true. I think that oftentimes you find that especially if you're leading across multiple different products within an organization, there will be times where certain of those products require more love and attention, like within the portfolio. Either because there's a strategic opportunity or because something like there was ball drop that needs to be picked up. And so philosophically, like I really try to consistently optimize for like what is the best for the system? Like, do I need to move PMMs over here because this is what we need to focus on right now? Or do we need to, improve our like 1+1=3 messaging here and here because that's going to be most effective. So anyway, always thinking about how do you really create the best system overall versus individually making sure that each of those product areas are getting the right, like an equal amount of love and attention.
Great, thank you. One last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. So we talked earlier about cross-functional alignment stakeholders. For companies that haven't had product marketing, where product marketing is still just getting established as a function, any advice that you have about a way to gain influence, help shape that roadmap in a company with facing that challenge?
Yeah, I would say pick one thing, and I think the thing that I've learned over time And it's the thing I like so much about product marketing, but I realize how different we are. Like just I think most product marketing people are systems thinkers. They care about frameworks. Often our stakeholders are not the same. And so, and I've done this before, where I was running all of marketing at a startup and there was no product marketing function. So then I was also all of product marketing. Pick one or two things. Don't say, here's the 11 things that product marketing does. And let me and normally there's like one or two most important things that are hot fires. And it could be like, we need a new pitch. Every time, every pitch is bespoke and we can't scale anything, or we don't understand why we're winning deals. We don't, that's maybe digging with the sales team, but like, we don't know what our pattern recognition is so we can build on it. Or something as tactical as like, we're in the bottom left of this Gartner Magic Quadrant. Can we just get up there? And that'll be a forcing function to pull other things through. I think that's the like do a thing of value that is sort of most important. That is product marketing-y. And then after it's done, being like, that's the magic of product marketing. Don't lead with, let me tell you about the magic of product marketing, and sit down. Other product marketers love that. But I think very often our partners, whether it's in go-to-market or kind of product and engineering roles or executives, they don't come from marketing. They're often like, that's a tough road to hoe.
I emphatically agree with you. The other thing that I see happening, especially when product marketing teams pivot and try to become the true craft, product marketing also becomes the big dumping ground for everything. Like, we are the jacks of all trades in a lot of ways, and also the exciting part about being in product marketing is you sit at the center of the wheel. That's also the biggest challenge because everybody needs you for something or thinks they do. So in order to really build out that craft and that function, I 100% agree with John that you should pick something that is going to be like the agent of future change. Like a Gartner report is great because it's highly cross-functional and you need to work with product and you need to establish credibility. The website is another great thing because it's very visible. Like the pitch deck, that gives you the relationship with sales. So I think picking something that's very much in your craft to prove the value of product marketing and learning how to say no, which is the hardest thing. And I think we all struggle with that, is probably the flip side of it as well.
Yes, to everything that maybe was implicit to what you guys are already saying, but I'll just say it out loud, is like, and make sure that one thing is very clearly connected to the priorities of the leaders within the company, right? Like, so I understand, like, you're new to this company, you're defining product marketing, just line yourself up with the biggest priorities and the biggest opportunities so that you can have measurable impact versus delivering stuff that's neat and fun.
100%. And I'll add as we wrap this up, and make sure after you're done with it, you share it to everybody in the company that needs to know as evidence of what product marketing does. You got to sell your own work and be a case study for yourself sometimes. So thank you all, John, Claire, Emmy, for contributing today. I'll hand it over to Heather to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you to our panel and our moderator. We work hard to curate the best product marketing mentors for you to learn from, including the people on this panel. When you're ready for your next job, I recommend looking for jobs on their teams. If you had a question that wasn't answered, you can search thousands of answers on sharebird.com or ask it on an upcoming Sharebird AMA. As a reminder, our next event is on March 19th on Mastering Product Launches. You can register for that event at the link in the chat. Lastly, if you have any questions or feedback for us, please email us at events@sharebird.com. Thank you, everyone.